Well, good afternoon, dear listeners.
Or evening.
Or evening. Today is the 24th of September, the year 2019. I'm Peter Clark.
And I'm Brach Jennings, and I can't keep a straight face.
Brock has a case of the giggles.
For the first time in 3 years, I think it's the first time, I didn't do the introduction on this episode because I couldn't say it without laughing.
It's true. It's true.
We're going to throw a plug in for you listeners. If you support us on Patreon, we will give you some access to this behind the scenes stuff that you don't get to hear.
It's true.
So there's a little incentive for you. If you would like to support the Ministry of Stumbling Block, you will have exclusive access. Don't ask me how that works. I'm just the director. But exclusive access to some behind-the-scenes material.
Yeah, I'll start making a monthly blooper reel or something.
Oh, my goodness. It's going to be so long.
I'll just do best ofs.
It's still going to be so long. See, listeners, you guys probably don't realize this, or maybe you do if any of you do your own podcasts, but I've said this before, I'll say it again. Peter makes us sound really good.
Thank you.
Because let me tell you, we make some of these things that I just go, how is he going to clean that up? And then lo and behold, the next week, it's a coherent thought. Well, coherent for us anyway, which could be stretching the notion of coherent.
Right? We at least generally finish our sentences.
Generally, and I think I've said this before, for me as a systematician, the most fun part for me is having the opportunity to break out of structure.
Mm-hmm.
And fortunately, one of the many wonderful things about being a student of Jürgen Moltmann is he doesn't necessarily expect the kind of structure one might think of for a systematician. And if you read his so-called systematic contributions to theology, you'll know what I mean. In other words, he does a lot of constructive, creative work. His thoughts are coherent, right? So what he says about eschatology lines up with Christology and Trinity and pneumatology, all this anthropology. But he doesn't do loci method. And I'm not actually sure how many systematicians anymore do that in general, but Moltmann definitely doesn't. And that's really one of the many joys about working under him, is he expects me to know texts historically. And he gave me a very hard time on Barth. I mean hard time in the good way, of course, about my reading of Barth this summer. And then, lo and behold, after 3, 4, maybe even 5, I think it might have even been 5 weeks, he kept sending me back to the German, and back to the German, and back to the German. And he then said, now, interpret it. And, it was glorious. It was glorious to write that. I think I said this before. I wrote it with Ed Sheeran's new album on in the background. But because I'd done that work, that what we might call exegetical work, I got to play. Mm-hmm. And he's got an essay actually called Theology of Play that I really recommend from the 70s. And it's just a joy. But this podcast for me is even different than the kind of stuff I do with Dr. Moltmann. In other words, I guess I'm not so worried about coherence here. Although I think I'm relatively coherent.
You are relatively coherent. It's true.
I mean, you just can't get the systematician out of me. It's there. I'm sorry, Peter. It's not going anywhere.
Yeah.
But it's nice to have fun and to stretch and to show the respectfully irreverent side of theology. Mm-hmm. And I think, particularly as an academic, and I'm an academic now at a big research university, I gotta do serious work. It's nice to let my hair down. I mean, I obviously I can let my hair down around Dr. Moltmann, and I can let my hair down around friends and stuff, but to actually say in a public forum, Yeah, we can have fun with this. That's a real treat for me. I hope you feel similarly.
Yeah, no, I do. Absolutely.
And listeners, we we hope you're satisfied with it. And if you want to have even more fun, subscribe and hear our behind the scenes stuff,
Yes,
which Peter
absolutely.
will put together because that's his baby, not mine.
Yep.
I'm just going to talk about it.
Right.
It's really all about this podcast. Let's be real. This podcast is all about the producer.
Oh, come on. That's not true.
I hit the talk button on, what is this program called?
FaceTime.
FaceTime. Sorry, I forgot. I kept thinking Apple phone. I hit the talk button on FaceTime. I listened to the rough cut. I mean...
Yeah, but you approve the rough cut, and you're a major part of the talking that happens on this podcast, so...
Well, hopefully not. Well, yeah, but hopefully not too much of the talking. But yeah, I see what you mean. Well, today, Peter, we had talked about a topic, and I thought we'd talk about hell. You want to talk about hell?
Yes.
Here's something Dr. Maltman says, two things that he says. This is an article from 1997.
Okay.
Just after he wrote his wonderful book on universal salvation called The Coming of God, Christian Eschatology. So there's a couple of things from this short article here. For Luther, hell is not an otherworldly place in the underworld, but an experience of God. The experience of abandonment by God from Gethsemane to Golgotha is Christ's descent into hell. In Christ, what hell is becomes evident because it is overcome and opened up through him. This logic of hell, I'm skipping a bit. He has a couple of arguments here for the Anglican notion of hell. Mm-hmm. This logic of hell, it seems to me, is in the first place inhuman. What happens to people who never had the choice or were not able to decide? Children who died young, the severely handicapped, sick geriatric patients. Are they in heaven or in total non-being? What about the millions whom the gospel has not reached and who therefore never had the choice? What about the Jews and members of other religions? And how firm must our own conviction of faith be to preserve us from total non-being? The logic of hell is, in my opinion, this is Dr. Maltman, in the last resort, atheistic. The free person is God and has the choice of heaven or hell. The will of such persons is their kingdom of heaven. In the last judgment, God is merely their unfree aid towards fulfillment. God must keep to our decision so we can make what we will of him. Those who are free forge their own bliss or act as their own executioners. This is really good, isn't it? Mm-hmm. They have control not only over their lives here, but also over their eternal destiny, as we ourselves decide we need no God for heaven and hell. After God has made us free in this way, God has done his duty and has gone, leaving us to our own fate. And he keeps going, but I love that where he says the logic of hell is atheistic.
It's fascinating. I just realized, actually, the alliteration of Gethsemane to Golgotha to Gehenna, which Gehenna is the word we generally translate as hell in the New Testament, particularly the Gospels.
Yeah, Gehenna, Gethsemane, Golgotha, Gehenna. Isn't that interesting?
It's fascinating, and for those who don't know, Gehenna is literally it's a valley around the outskirts of the city of Jerusalem. So to be cast into Gehenna is to be cast out of the city of Jerusalem.
Well, I want to say two things. First of all, I want to read the last part here of Dr. Maltman's observations. It's a short paragraph, but it brings everything home. Mm-hmm. Because this is right about Gehenna being tossed out of the city.
Right.
Okay. Dr. Maltman says this: the judgment is not God's last word. It produces in the world that righteousness on which the new creation is to be built. God's last word is, "Behold, I make all things new." Revelation 21:5. No one is accepted or released from that. Not even the mass murderers of world history whom we would wish in hell. Love is God's mercy on the lost.
That contrasts, interestingly, with the thing you read earlier about how sort of we choose where we end up. We end up in the heaven or hell of our own making.
Well, that's what he's saying is atheistic.
Right. Oh, okay, I see what you're saying.
Uh-huh. Yeah. The logic of hell is atheistic because it says it is all up to us.
But in a way...
Peter, you got line 4 of the creed wrong. You're done.
What? Oh.
It's as if God were saying, Peter, you got line 4 of the creed wrong. You're done.
Ugh, gosh. No, but so it's interesting to me. I refuse to completely discount the concept of a hell-ish type place because it's referenced so often in the New Testament, particularly in the Gospels. It's referenced in Matthew, but it is referenced both in Mark and Luke as well. Interestingly, it's not referenced in John. Not by the word hell, anyway.
Yeah, but you've got the light and darkness metaphor, and you've got the...
Right.
You've got the implication that people didn't believe and turned away.
Yeah, but so there's something... So this is where I'm going to get a little controversial here.
Oh, there's a bug. There's a big wasp. Sorry. Go ahead. Little controversial.
That's okay. You take a moment here.
You can leave that part in. That doesn't have to go to our bloopers. I think it's funny enough for the general public.
Okay, fine.
Anyway, go ahead. I'm turning around in circles looking for this yellow jacket. This area, it's so beautiful in Baden-Württemberg, but there are so many wasps.
You get a wasp trap.
Well, really, what I should do, to use the word of the devil, is to get a screen for my window.
Well, that too. But...
Anyway, sorry, go ahead. You're going to get a little controversial.
If you were to put a gun to my head and force an understanding of hell out of me, it would lean towards what's called purgatorial universalism.
Yeah. I'm not surprised. Why is that?
Because I think ultimately there are some things like that deserve punishment. Ultimately, there are some things that we need to pay the price for. I also believe that there are people who wouldn't accept God's love if it was handwritten in gold ink on fine parchment paper.
Yeah, well, I think that's anybody, but okay.
And so there has to be something other than heaven.
Mm-hmm. You know what Dr. Maltman says about heaven, right?
Well, I can guess, but I'm speaking in a post-resurrection sense, because otherwise, what good has free will done us?
Well, nothing. Oh, sorry, I'll let you finish. Sorry.
Or what value does free will have? If we're all forcibly shuffled in to this new earth where everything is happy clappy and we all get along.
You mean in the new heaven and new earth that wasp isn't going to try to bite me? I
mean, that's what some people would say.
Oh, I can't wait for that day. Can it come soon, please?
Or at least it wouldn't. At least, it wouldn't. The wasp wasn't trying to bite you.
Hello, the thing was zooming toward me like a torpedo.
I don't know. Maybe it didn't see you, or it thought you were something else.
Gee, what do I look like? A cat?
I don't know. Might have wanted the sweat off your forehead or something.
Remind me to tell you the story about when I threw up on my cat, okay?
Okay.
But I want to make sure you finish first your argument here.
I think that's it. I think that's...
Okay, good. Now I can tell you about throwing up on my cat.
Okay.
No, I got really sick one time, a couple of years. I'm still at Luther when it happened. I think you were already graduated, Peter, because I was writing my thesis.
Oh, okay.
And I got so sick, and I knew I was going to throw up, and I was running toward the bathroom, And Charlie was standing right there, like sitting on his back paws, right as I was trying to get to the bathroom, literally in my way, and did not move when he saw me running toward him. I projectile vomited all over my cat.
These things happen.
And then, of course, I had to then go to the restroom and do more of it because I was so horribly sick. And so then, I feel bad. I've covered my cat in vomit, and he's licking it off himself.
Oh, gross.
Like, just horrible. And so I get a towel, and I make the towel wet, and I start, sort of bathing my cat, if you will. And Charlie loves water, so that's not the problem.
Right.
But I start rubbing it off him, and he just bites me. Just no hesitation, just bites me. Peter, I was waiting for you. I was waiting for you to say that Charlie was totally justified in what he did.
Oh, I was just, partially, but I was also just, I'm perfectly fine taking care of my own filth. Thank you, human.
No, I thought it was just because I made him so dirty.
No, it's because he didn't want help. It's because cats don't want help.
Well, I felt so bad. And the whole time, every time I get sick, it's like my cats look at me like the big cat has a fur ball. Yep. Or a hairball, sorry, not fur ball.
Yes.
Now that we've digressed down that rabbit hole, let me respond to what you were saying. So the first thing I want to observe is this is an argument that I think you have been struggling with for some years now.
Mm-hmm.
The notion of hell and salvation and free will. And I don't know if our listeners have witnessed this, but I just personally have seen you swing back and forth with this argument.
Well, and I do. So that's why I say, to get, sort of purgatory universalism is what you'd get if you put a gun to my head. But I swing back and forth on a day-to-day basis on what's going on and what's happening and all of that.
How much Lewis have you read lately?
Not lately. I haven't read a lot, but I've read a lot of Lewis over my lifetime.
Because I think your argument surrounding free will is quite influenced by Lewis.
Oh, I'm sure it is.
Well, let me give perhaps an alternative interpretation.
Okay.
Maybe this won't surprise you. Sin, death, the devil, hell, and the law, with its accusations, were nailed to the cross. In the happy exchange, Jesus takes on the sin of the world, while also becoming one with the world's victims, by the way.
Right. And
gives the world his righteousness. So when it comes to questions of hell, I respond to the frustration of actually a couple of people I know. I respond with, look to the wounds of Jesus. There you will find election, and you will find what hell actually is. In other words, that the wounds of Jesus have overcome any notion of eternal damnation or eternal separation. When we die, and I'm thinking more in terms of death and afterlife than I normally would, but I'll do it now. When we die, God looks at us and sees Jesus Christ. So there is judgment. I'm not denying judgment, but the judgment is the judgment of the crucified God of Golgotha. So judgment ultimately is not something to be feared.
I agree.
I'm not saying that death is happy, clappy, wonderful, but it's not the dies irae of the great requiem settings of the centuries, Verdi, Mozart, so on and so forth. That's not judgment. That judgment of the dies irae is a woundedless God.
I mean, I agree on a certain level, but I'm just reading through part of Hebrews here again, where Hebrew talks about suffering as sort of not inherently bad, and as suffering as a way of learning, as a way of being honed and sharpened, into readiness for the kingdom of God. That's how I view hell, as a place where people receive their final honing.
But I'm not sure it needs to be a place as much as a state.
Well, you know what I mean.
Yeah, but I do think we need to be careful with place, only because of the rise of fundamentalism and so on and so forth.
Okay, yeah. I mean, anytime you use a noun to describe what happens after death, you're treading on thin ice.
Yeah, well, I think anytime you talk about what happens after death, period, you're treading on thin ice. But, that's a different argument.
Yeah, and I would never make an out-and-out, this is absolutely positively what happens after we die statement. That is, as my father would put it, that we'll all find out in the hereafter kind of issue.
I think I would be a little bolder, not necessarily involved with what happens after death, but in saying we die into the crucified Christ. So I would be bold to say judgment is not to be feared.
Well, again, I agree that it's not to be feared, but I also agree that, but I also would say that suffering is not to be feared.
Well, suffering is not to be feared because Jesus Christ is in solidarity with us in our suffering.
Right.
But I think my own inability to fear, love, and trust God as I should says to me, suffering is terrifying. Death is terrifying.
Right.
Now, death isn't terrifying. I learned this from a Canadian mystic 8 years ago, what I'm just about to say, mystic priest from Vancouver Island. And he said, I don't fear death. It's over. It's done. There's nothing. I fear dying. And I think that's where I am too. I fear that crossover between consciousness and death because, and I could learn something from the Buddhists with what I'm about to say, but because I'm grasping at my memories and my experiences, and I'm afraid those are going to be lost. Mm. And at the moment of death, the only thing you've got at that moment is the promises of God in the external word. And so I mean, nothing. And you're alone. You could be surrounded by family and friends and people who love you, but when you take that last breath, you are still alone. And that to me is terrifying, were it not for the promises of God in Jesus Christ. Mm-hmm. I mean, that is more terrifying than any stupid doctrine of hell the church could come up with. My God, some of these people who are so gung-ho on hell ought to actually wrestle with the fear of death once. That is far more terrifying. Fear of dying, excuse me. So what do you think of that one? I'm ready for the rebuttal.
I don't know. Everyone dies alone.
Well, Luther says that brilliantly in his sermon on preparing to die, which, by the way, is the theological predecessor to Barth's doctrine of election in many ways. Mm-hmm. I don't know if Barth would have agreed with that, but let me tell you, the connections really are there. Beautiful, beautiful sermon. Have you read it of Luther?
I might have. I've read a number of Luther's sermons, and I have trouble keeping them straight. Okay, yeah. That's where he says, "Look to the wounds; there your election is certain." Yep.
And that's why the terror of death then lessens, right? And the terror of death, to do good Pauline theology, is sin. That's the law. That's second use of the law coming in at that point, and just, I'll put this in personal terms, just utterly crushing me at that point. I don't know if this is your experience. Is it?
I'm gonna put in a brief sort of trigger warning for our friends who don't want to listen to discussions of suicide or things like that. You may want to skip forward a few minutes. But because of my depression, I really, really don't. In fact, when the law comes at me like that, death is the one thing I want.
Because you want the law's accusations to end.
Right.
And so then is the comfort for you, or is there comfort for you in knowing that Christ is the end of the law?
I don't know. There should be. Like it's one of those things I want to say there should be. Uh-huh. But it's hard for me to accept that. I blame myself so much for things that happen. I internalize the law so much. It is very hard for me to accept that.
And the notion of justification through the law is, I think, so embedded, particularly in United States culture,
Mm-hmm.
right? If you just do one more thing, you wouldn't feel so bad. You know, if you, I don't know, if you would have handled this or that situation differently, then you wouldn't be in the predicament you're in, right? The voice of the accuser just roars and does not want to let up.
Right. We deal with mental illness like a lack of faith, as a lack of faith, right? I'm depressed or I'm anxious because I lack faith in God.
Well, and that's just bullshit, right?
Yeah.
It's utterly ridiculous that we're going to look at somebody and say, if you're suffering, it's because you lack faith. Well, I'm sorry. Thank you for that nice high horse that you just rode in on. You know, and you can get off your horse, and you can put your horse next to some water and see if you can make him drink, and then you can go away. I mean, but I think what I was saying regarding death and so regarding the terror is in a way a bit similar to what you're saying. Right? Death is the one thing you want, and I have said I don't fear death, I fear dying. Right? So, because by the time you get to death, by the way, I don't think theologians in liberal settings talk about what we're talking about enough.
No, I don't think they do. I think they're terrified of it.
Well, then let's admit it. I would rather admit publicly, yes, I am utterly terrified. I don't know what's going to happen to me.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where the promises of God are so powerful, because at that moment, when all you have is the Word and the sacraments, then you know in your bones, deeper and maybe quieter, paradoxically, even though the Word in this case is external, it'll come more quietly than the terror raging against you. You know in your bones God is for you in Jesus Christ. And nothing can take away that promise because you are baptized. Nothing.
Yeah.
Utterly, absolutely nothing. That's what we've got as Lutherans. And I'm not trying to be sectarian here, but I'm saying Luther in particular knew the consoling power of baptism, and we modern Lutherans have obliterated it. Because we've turned baptism into you're welcome into the community. I don't deny that. You are welcome into the community. Absolutely. Let's celebrate. We have another baptized member of Christ's community. But you know what? This is a powerful sacrament when the devil strikes. And the devil will strike. And when he does, he is going to look like God. And in those moments, you will say to yourself, God is cursing me. When in reality, what's actually happening is this notion of both pruning and solidarity. There will be resurrection, but first there is Good Friday, and even more importantly, there is Holy Saturday. And it ain't gonna feel like there's resurrection, because for Jesus of Nazareth, there was no guarantee of resurrection on that Holy Saturday as he lay in that cold grave of Joseph of Arimathea's tomb. Did I mention this is the subject of my dissertation, by the way?
I don't think you did.
Well, are you surprised?
Not really. No.
And so I think we need to talk about it, trigger warnings aside. I think what we need to talk about is not necessarily the triggering stuff, but the power of the consolation of the gospel in the face of death. So, that's just in light of what you were saying.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it is something that we avoid talking about, and it is something that we shouldn't avoid talking about, and it's fascinating because, like, it didn't used to be something that we avoided talking about, right?
So what changed, do you think?
Capitalism?
Well, Peter, you know me. I'm up for blaming anything you want to on capitalism, but maybe you can help me figure out why.
Capitalism has this, like, eternal optimism to it.
Capitalism denies the fallenness of the human will.
Exactly. It denies the fallenness of human nature, and of even just the human condition, right? No consideration is taken under capitalism for mental health or physical health, even for that matter. I was talking to my therapist the other day, and I said I'm increasingly convinced that the two worst things that ever happened to our mental health were the Industrial Revolution and the Enlightenment.
Why the Enlightenment? I get the Industrial Revolution, but I don't get the Enlightenment.
The Enlightenment is a compounding of the Industrial Revolution and of a beginning of the belief that we can implement our will upon the world around us in a way that isn't actually feasible. That there is some perfect natural state that we can get back to.
So it's the optimism again.
It's the optimism again.
Which is so often, by the way, a bourgeois optimism. Mm-hmm. But now let's be fair to the Enlightenment. You know, I like my dentist.
Oh no, they're both excellent for our physical health.
Actually, I don't have a dentist in Germany, but if I had one, I'd like him.
They're both excellent for our physical health.
Yeah.
But they make no balance for physical and mental health.
Yeah, I see what you mean.
You should be able to think your way out of these problems.
How does that work for you, thinking your way out of your own problems?
It doesn't. But you know what I mean? But that's the thing of the Enlightenment, the rational mind.
Yeah.
And at the end of the day, we don't actually have rational minds.
Peter, I strive for rationality in my theological work. Thank you very much.
I know you strive for it, but ultimately all of our minds are subject to flaws, to fallacies, to imperfections, to biases.
Do you mean there are parts of my theology that are going to be incoherent?
I don't know if they'll be incoherent, but they'll be biased.
Yeah, well, that I know, but it's more I fear that a sense of not being connected or not being organized.
Oh, you can organize things wonderfully and still have biases and fallacies and things like that. Know my personal favorite fallacies.
What are your favorite fallacies? Tell us. The world is dying to know.
Oh, appeal to authority is a classic. I love the appeal to authority.
I do too.
And I a real tendency for the no true Scotsman fallacy, as much as I love to call it out on social media when other people do it.
Actually, I think you have called me out on that before, but I can't remember why.
I'm sure I have. It's both my favorite fallacy to call out and one of my favorite fallacies to commit.
Well, at least you admit it. Trying to think what my favorite fallacy is. I don't know that I have one. You may be the only person I know that's ever spoken to me about a favorite fallacy.
This is what happens when you do debate in high school.
I have a favorite heresy. Does that count?
Close. What's your favorite heresy?
Guess.
Donatism?
Oh, come on.
Arianism?
Oh.
I don't know what.
Well, obviously Christian universalism.
Oh, okay.
Arianism? Seriously?
I thought you meant like your favorite heresy to... I don't know. What's my favorite heresy? And this is not, for me, it's not like a heresy I commit. It's just my favorite heresy to talk about. Oh, crap. What's it called? It's not Nestorianism.
Thank God.
Is it Donatism?
Oh.
So, yes, Donatism.
And why is that your favorite to talk about?
Because it's so rampant still in the church today.
Oh? How?
That people believe their priests or clergy need to be faultless or perfect for their ministry to be effective. That priests aren't really people too.
Looked at the disciples?
I got told when I was on internship that 20 or 30 years ago, my mental health issues would have made me ineligible for ministry.
Yeah, well, if it makes you feel any better, Luther's mental health issues would have made him not only ineligible for ministry, but ineligible to be a professor, probably.
Yeah, and only 10 years ago, your sexual orientation would have made you ineligible for ministry.
Well, that's not currently my problem, honestly.
I know, but I'm just saying, that's Donatism.
Yeah, I suppose it is. You know what my Luther teacher told me regarding the sexuality issue? She goes, you know what? What's the big deal? We could have called a hippopotamus, but he still has gifts for the church.
Right?
I thought it was funny.
It is funny.
Yeah, I guess the Donatism is rampant, but I honestly, I think Arianism is rampant too, which is why I groaned so loudly over here.
Well, all three of the major Trinitarian heresies
being Arianism, Nestorianism, and Apollinarianism.
Well, I was thinking Arianism, modalism, and partialism.
Partialism?
That God is three parts that together make one whole.
That's a form.
The Voltron heresy.
That's a form of Sabellianism.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So you're talking about Sabellianism and Arianism?
Well, no, because Arianism is hierarchical.
Yeah.
And
they're different heresies.
Right. But I'm saying, but there's that, and then there's also modalism, wherein God is just one person who acts in three different ways.
Yeah. One person, three modes of being.
Yeah.
Bart really had to be careful with that because he actually talks about the three modes of being in the church dogmatics, and you just want to go, oh, could you use different language, please?
Yeah.
Like, how is this not modalist exactly? But you can Sabellianism, and let me think. Modalism is a type of Sabellianism, I believe.
But you just said partialism was a type of Sabellianism.
Correct.
So how are they both part of Sabellianism?
I think you're talking about the same thing.
They're not! No, partialism is three different persons.
Oh, I'm sorry. That's tritheism, not partialism.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's tritheism. So you're talking about tritheism, Sabellianism, and Arianism.
So partialism...
Wow, so isms.
Partialism is like there's like the analogy of the three-leaf shamrock that has three leaves, but it's one plant.
Yeah, why do you keep calling it partialism? It's called tritheism. That's why I was so confused.
Well, because it's three persons. It's like, but it's still one God, but they are not individually themselves God. They're three parts that together make one Godhead. It is known in general by the laity as partialism.
Well, I think we need to do a better job with the so-called laity because partialism. Sitting here going, there's a heresy that I've never heard of. Wow. I know most of the big ones. Most of the big ones are in Trinity and Christology because God knows I committed them. I did. Let's see. I was an Arian for a while. I was an Apollinarian for a while. You know that one?
Mm-mm.
Jesus basically doesn't have a human soul. I was a Nestorian for a while. Two Christs. I talked about Jesus and then, the Christ afterwards. I was a Nestorian. Let's see. I was a Donatist. I thought for a while you had to have that apostolic succession in order to be a good priest.
Now, see, I don't think apostolic succession actually falls under Donatism.
Yeah, but the way I was using it, it was.
Oh, okay.
Apostolic succession itself, no. That's an adiaphora or a gift of the gospel, depending on who you talk to.
Right.
But the way I was using it fell under Donatism.
Oh, okay.
Let's see. I was a Gnostic. Let's see. I was a Gnostic before I went through like all the big heresies in like 3 years. It was quite fun, actually.
I think Gnosticism is actually one of the most dangerous heresies.
Oh, absolutely it is. Karl Rahner said that Gnosticism is the most dangerous heresy with which the church has had to fight. It's anti-body.
Well, it's not just anti-body, it's that whole idea of secret knowledge. There's secret knowledge.
I guess now that I'm thinking about it, yes, the secret knowledge, that's the problem too, but I was actually thinking at the moment of Docetism.
Oh, yeah.
I was a docetist for a while. Oh, I got in big trouble for that in seminary, by the way.
I'm sure you did. Rightly so.
Well, but you're the one that talks about how PLTS is so liberal. I'll tell you, I had myself in one of my professor's doghouses for the docetism junk. And yes, I did just call it junk. I don't think I think that, to me, I don't like Gnosticism at all.
Yeah.
But I really think the docetism is more dangerous, particularly as a queer person, because we're so often taught to deny our bodies anyway.
Yeah.
And so the anti-incarnation, well, the whole thing, Gnosticism is also anti-incarnational because it's anti-matter. The goal is to escape the world. And you want to say, excuse me, but I thought the word became enfleshed.
Yes.
Or did I miss that part? Maybe I read it wrong? Nope, pretty sure it says the word became flesh. So, Peter, did you commit any of the great heresies?
I mean, I flirted with modalism for a while.
Yeah, that one's tempting. I guess I forgot. I did modalism for a while too. But how long was it for you to flirt with modalism?
Not in high school.
Oh, the young. Wow.
I was made to grow up quickly in various ways. Not the least of which having parents who work in the ministry. So.
Yeah, that's the difference. I guess me really being a convert to a mature understanding of the church.
Mm-hmm.
Although you're a convert, well, we're both converts to Lutheranism,
right?
But I think I'm a convert in an additional way, in the sense of a convert to actively embracing being a baptized member of the church.
Yeah. In large part, I became interested in heresies in high school and in university, where I began to sort of study them as a little bit of habit. Just look them up, look through them. Okay, well, that's a heresy. Why is that a heresy? Where and how do we still see this heresy today?
All over the place.
Right, exactly. That's what one tends to find when one looks into heresies.
But the danger of that is you can become a heresy hunter.
Yeah.
God rest his soul, I don't think we need another Tertullian. Thank you very much. He was a jerk. Seriously.
What? I'm not allowed to be like St. Nicholas and go around punching heretics in the face?
I know. Oh, okay. I'm reading Zizek now, and Zizek has this screed. He gets it from somebody else. I forget who, but he builds on it. He has this screed against essentially Facebook memes, because he thinks they're just such surface level knowledge. Okay, I think he's right, but I tell you, I love that meme on Facebook about St. Nicholas punching heretics.
Bam! Punch him in the face!
You know, there is a kinder way to deal with heretics.
Yes.
And it's something that my first systematics professor, a wonderful Roman Catholic sister, told me.
Oh, it's not to listen to our podcast then, because that's before our time.
Yeah, no, that was in 2012. I think Marianne said that. She said, if you come down like a ton of bricks, you're not going to get anywhere. You need to reach out and love.
Yeah. No, it's true.
And there's a humility in that as well, right? The heresies, well, personally, I'll just speak for myself. The heresies we've named just get under my skin. And so, in good CPE fashion, what's behind that, Brach? Well, let me tell you.
What do you make of that?
Yeah. Well, the reason that they get under my skin, and that I do react so strongly, particularly to to all of them, all of the big ones that are Christological or Trinitarian, is because if those teachings are right, Jesus Christ has not overcome death.
Right. And
he cannot be trusted. He cannot be trusted in that moment where you have to die alone.
Right. Lewis is God or a bad man.
What is that? Is that like the liar, lunatic, or Lord thing?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Boy, it makes me really uncomfortable when I share something with Lewis like that. Why is that, do you suppose?
I don't know. I think it's because you've dealt with people who've read Lewis badly.
Yeah, actually, you're right. And I got a whole section in my library last year of used Lewis books to try to undo some of that. But yes, then yes, this would be Lewis's thing. I was, of course, thinking of Luther, but yes, that okay, Lewis too. And Tillich, really. The reason Tillich has a logos Christology is because of the notion of overcoming death.
Mm-hmm.
And that's really what justification hinges on, and it's death in all its forms. It's not just when we lose consciousness forever and cease to be living, the sense that we would describe living as human beings, but it's death as far as sort of the state, where you just don't feel like you can go on anymore. And you ask yourself, what reason do I have to get out of bed in the morning? That's death. And that's what Jesus has crushed underfoot by rising from the dead. But if these damn heresies are right, there isn't a reason to get out of bed in the morning as a Christian.
Right.
These Christological Trinitarian heresies. I rather like the heresy of Christian universalism, as you know. But I'm not actually convinced that is a heresy, by the way. But what do you think?
Whew. Man, I don't know. That's a hard one to call. It all depends on what you mean by universalism, I feel like.
The restoration of the entire creation, the sun, the moon, the plants, the stars, the animals, the galaxies, everything.
I think I'm with you as long as you don't get into the fine points of the how.
Well, the fine points of the how is God will make all things new.
Right. But some people still trying to get into the fine points of the how there. And I think
really?
For me heresy is in the details, right?
Uh-huh.
Like, the more detailed of an explanation you try and make for a wondrous thing, for a mystery of the church, the more likely you are to commit a heresy.
Yeah. Yeah. No, of course, I mean, one can't, this is speculative theology, but not in the sense where Luther criticizes it, right? Luther says true theology is practical and it has its foundation in Christ crucified. Speculative theology belongs to the devil and in hell.
Mm-hmm.
The reason I don't think this is speculative theology is because Jesus Christ is at the other center. It hinges on Jesus Christ as God, as Lord and God and fully human.
Right.
And that's why I just don't buy that it's heresy.
Fair enough.
I think there are people in our tradition, Peter, who would say that is heresy.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely they would.
And I think the other boundary line, to use the Tillichian term, that says it's not a heresy is because I'm not making it a law. I'm not saying the church has to subscribe to this or it's not Christian.
Mm. Well, I think it's fascinating because I've done some reading of LCMS authors and commentators over the years. Mm-hmm. And I think some of them, interestingly, and I hadn't expected this, also lean towards a kind of universalism, a kind of ultimate universalism. But they hold on to the law mattering more in this world than ELCA Lutherans do.
You don't think we have a notion of the law mattering in terms of our advocacy for universal health care and education and all of that?
I mean, like, in terms of things like the issues of homosexuality or the personal legislation of behavior.
Well, homosexuality, to use that awful term, I really hate that term.
Sorry.
That is a matter of first use of the law.
Yeah.
The reason allowing LGBT marriage is because you're talking about the just ordering of society. So I risk at the moment getting a bit defensive, and I don't mean to, but
it's fine.
I want to critique these LCMS authors that say we don't have the law gospel dialectic in the ELCA. I think we do. So I just don't buy it that we have thrown out that we have thrown out this accent of our understanding of Christianity. You know what, Peter? I'm going to put it stronger. I refuse to buy it.
Okay.
Because what those LCMS authors I'll speak for myself. What they're telling me is my Lutheran teachers weren't really Lutheran.
Well, I think for me, what's really interesting in this is how much the LCMS cares about this stuff. If there are people, and they'll deny this, right? Any LCMS author you'd point out, you kind of implied that they deny it because they'd get kicked out immediately. But there are LCMS authors who really skirt with a kind of universalism. Mm-hmm. But it still matters so much that we do everything just right in this world.
That is nothing more than salvation by works. I'm sorry. I mean...
But that's the thing, it's works without salvation.
Oh, I see what you mean. Oh, that's even worse!
I know!
My gosh, if you're going to tell me I got to do all these good works, at least let me get something for it.
Right? So you're going to get saved whether or not you do the good works, but we're going to make you do the good works anyway.
You know, excuse me while I quote my favorite sparring partner. You know who my favorite sparring partner is, right? Theological sparring partner?
No.
Oh, I'm sure you can guess. Well, Gerhard Forde, of course.
Oh, Forde, yeah.
I mean, you know, permit me to quote Forde here. You know, he's got that great story in his book on justification.
For the second time in our podcast history, Brach is now quoting Forde.
This is the title of our episode, Brach Cites Forde 2. But anyway, Gerhard Forde's got this great story in his book on justification, A Matter of Death to Life, and he visits this pastor who is on his deathbed, and the pastor is proud of the fact that he'd never done a good work.
Yep.
I love that. It is scandalous to say that, but of course, what the pastor means is by himself he didn't do a good work. Mm-hmm. All the good works that are done are through the Holy Spirit alone.
Yep.
I mean, that's freeing, because now on that deathbed, you've got Jesus Christ and him crucified. And that's what matters.
That is what matters. And on that note, we should wrap it up.
Well, after a fruitful, enlivening discussion, I never know where these things are going to go as the director, by the way, listeners.
I never know where they're going to go either.
Yeah, but you get to cut them out. On that note, I'm Brach Jennings.
And I'm Peter Clark.
And this has been Stumbling Block.
Stumbling Block is a production of Silver Turkey Studios. Our Patreon producer is Ben Dittman, our executive producer is Peter Clark, and our executive director is Brach Jennings. Our theme music is by Mirrors for Windows, and we are hosted by Podbean. We can be reached by email at stumblingblockpodcast@gmail.com. Please consider supporting us at patreon.com/stumblingblock. And as always, thank you for listening.